Yes, hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast here from your friends at Radio 2. My word, you're a sinful lot. This week's concise collection includes a sneaky sound shenanigan, a frantic flair farce, a daring and dramatic deception, and a manic, maggoty mishap. Here it all comes. Welcome to our confessional feature. And into the confession we have Sister Rebecca, we have... The Dean of Deadliness, who seems to be barging Sister Caroline out of her microphone position.
I don't think she needs it. I don't think she needs it at this stage.
Very well, listen up, because here's tonight's tale, which comes from Roger.
Roger, okay.
Yes. Pay attention, particularly all sound engineers.
Oh.
You might like this one.
That's unusual if they do that. Roger.
And out. Dear Father Simon, in the Absolution Assembly, a long time ago you read out a confession of mine concerning my days in an amateur operatic society.
Oh, yeah.
When I wound up a lady with a doorbell sound effect. And then, totally predictable, so did I. Anyway, after many years I feel I must ask absolution for another terrible tale. When I say amateur operatic society, the only amateurs involved in the production were the actual cast. Our producers, musical director and musicians were paid and often used to perform in 1,200-seat theatres, provided the stagehands, props department and lighting technician. Unfortunately, one of the venues also provided Eric. Eric was a sound engineer who used to pick up some extra cash doing occasional jobs for the theatre. He didn't make a living from it. In fact, he was a postie. But he was cheap and he was available. He was also a talentless noise polluter and an absolute tyrant.
I know a few of those.
He seemed to feel that his talents were wasted on an operatic society. He'd always turn up for shows wearing a T-shirt advertising some face-melting heavy metal band, and once shocked the more sensitive members of the society by testing the sound system by playing Big Bottom by Spinal Tap. Apart from this, he ruled all sound matters with a rod of iron, berating people while he fitted them with radio mics, chasing the cast after the shows and shouting at them to return his equipment, and not letting dress rehearsals get underway until he was absolutely satisfied that every fader was in the right place.
What a pain.
His precious sound desk was his sovereign territory, and he used to fly totally off the handle at anyone who went near it. We regularly had to suffer lectures from him about how it was expensive and highly technical and very delicate. He seemed to imply that we were all too stupid to comprehend it.
He's living it, isn't he?
If he had to walk away... If he had to walk away for it, he'd leave a clipboard with a piece of paper on it bearing the message, "Do not touch," not in big exclamation mark.
Right.
He also considered himself to be the last authority on all audio matters. Woe betide anyone who complained about their sound balance. I agree with that.
Well, I think we get the picture, don't we?
He once reduced the lead soprano to tears because she said her sound was a bit too bass-heavy, quite a problem for a soprano. The fact that she sounded like she was singing with her head in a bucket didn't seem to matter to Eric. He was right and no one was going to say anything different. It seemed this was Eric's way of making himself feel more important.
Eric.
Then one year we put on Gilbert and Sullivan's The Yeoman of the Guard, and Eric was in heaven. The reason being because he actually had a sound effect to produce. During the show there is the sound of a gunshot off stage, which was Eric's big moment. He was in his element. Every night when the cast arrived for the show, we were greeted by what sounded like the gunfight at the OK Corral, as Eric made sure his sound effect was working. But which shot to use? That was his conundrum. Well, the last night came, and as usual, when we played this particular venue, everyone was heartily sick of his petty tyrannies. As luck would have it, I was off stage and in the wings near Eric's treasured sound desk when he was called away to help someone with a troublesome radio mic. I haven't mentioned that I had also done some sound engineering in the past, and the arcane mysteries of Eric's treasured desk were an open book to me.
No.
In spite of his regular lectures on its complexity, it was the work of a moment to lift up the Do Not Touch notice and change the track on the CD player. The question began playing in my mind, should I or shouldn't I? Well, clearly he's going to do it, otherwise it's not much of a
course.
I decided that I should. Instead of track 11, I put on track 3.
No!
Pushed up the fader to the loudest volume possible instead of 6.
Not 3.
We did the proverbial 11. I replaced the warning notice, hoping that Eric wouldn't spot the fact that someone had fiddled with the desk. Anyway, I was back on stage when Eric's big moment came.
Go on.
Rather than a flintlock gun...
What did we get?
As per the script, The Omen of the Guard, 1888, Gilbert and Sullivan, I had switched the effect to a Sherman tank. Let me illustrate that point.
Oh, of course.
So instead of a... we had a...
Oh, he's brilliant. This guy's brilliant, isn't he?
That's fantastic sound engineering, can I just say? That's absolutely impeccable.
Yeah, that's good. Well done.
Instead of a... we had a...
All right.
The musical director yelped with surprise. Several of the audience gasped and jumped in their seats, and even some of the cast flinched and ducked as the huge boom echoed through the theatre. Slightly shocked and with ringing ears, we stumbled through the rest of the show, and as we left the stage after the curtain calls, we were greeted by a purple-faced, irate Eric. Worse was to come, as the main cast were handing their mics back to the apoplectic tyrant. The theatre manager came backstage. He'd received complaints, he said, not just about the excessively loud gunshot noise... oh, there it is again. But about the stream of bad language coming from behind the curtain while the audience were leaving, and which could clearly be heard in the front rows.
Got any of that?
He then... no, I haven't got any of that. He then gave Eric a lecture in spite of his protestations of innocence along the lines of, I know last night pranks are traditional, but that went too far. It went on for quite some time. Apparently scaring the pants off your audience, many of whom are sensitive opera types of advanced years, was quite beyond the pale, as was the audible swearing from behind the curtain. Well, Father Simon, I never let on. Right up to the time when I moved out of the area and left the society several years later, everyone was firmly convinced that the Big Bang had been Eric's fault. Now I need to seek absolution from Eric, who lost the gig, from our musical director, who got a shock, and from the various members of the cast and audience, who were also so shocked by the huge bang. In my defence, I have to say Eric had it coming, and future shows at that particular theatre were very much happier without him. Well, I find it hard to believe that there is a sound engineer who is not impeccably behaved, with the greatest ears, and it's not just a complete marvel and a joy to work
I
with.
totally agree with you there. I just don't recognise this kind of person at all. I can't even imagine somebody
Perfect ears, useless hands.
It's the engineers the BBC reject.
You see, deadly. You don't know what side your bread is buttered on. Anyway, I think it is very odd, this idea of a precious sound engineer who's not very good at his job. But, I mean, if there were such a thing, I think it would be very, very annoying. And I think, actually, he could have chosen a track that was completely different from the little gunshot.
That's what I thought you were going to do.
He could have chosen, you know, a woman screaming, or, I don't know...
Got a woman screaming?
A violin or something else. Anyway, I think that it sounds like Eric should have been punished more, and that he deserved it. So I think, Roger, you're completely forgiven.
Deadliness?
I think I'll forgive as well, I think, this time. No real harm done. And he needed getting rid of anyway. It was an utter pain. Eric was an utter pain, for goodness sake. So you are forgiven. You are forgiven on this occasion.
Let's see what Caroline...
I don't know if Deadly's forgiven. The sound effects he was producing throughout that were marvellous. On the matter of the gun at hand, the first gun sounded a bit like you're being slapped with a wet fish, whereas the second one had much more welly.
Can we hear the wet fish again?
the wet fish, hang on a second.
Here we go.
Can we have that again?
Wet fish.
Oh, right.
Second one, lots of welly.
Oh, there's a
So
welly or two in
therefore,
there, yeah.
big improvement, absolutely forgiven.
So this is the confession. It comes from Luke. Thank you, Luke. Dear, you always tell us a confession. It starts like this: Dear Father Simon and the Concerned Collective. I don't think that text did it? No, I don't think it did.
No, to be fair.
Thank you. I have carried the guilt, this burden, for 20 years. I feel it's time for me to confess my terrible tale. I was just 22 at the time and had travelled on leave to the depths of Devon for a weekend hiking across Dartmoor with my pal Denny. On the particular evening in question, we'd walked from our camping site down the lanes to a very friendly and popular tavern which sat opposite a field in a nearby village. There, after a nice meal, the beer and cider began to flow until time was eventually called. By this time, both Denny and I were reasonably merry. We decided to leave the tavern and start our journey back to the campsite. At this point, I should explain a little bit about both of us. Denny and I, both being from London, whilst aware of the ways of the countryside, were still automatically thinking in London terms. So whereas country folk would not think twice about the mess that cattle leave, and either have appropriate footwear or just shrug off any encounters with cowpats, us city folk, being more used to concrete, had footwear, shall we say, less suitable to mucky encounters. We had visited the tavern in the smarter, more fashionable clothes that young 20-somethings wore back in the late 80s. Felt moccasins is the best description. With tassels. How about that?
With tassels?
With tassel. Tasseled felt moccasins.
Yep.
Have they ever been in?
Well,
Yeah, they were in the 80s. I had some.
Did you?
Doesn't mean they were in.
That's true.
no, and we are talking Luke.
Anyway, so as we stumbled from the tavern that evening and decided to take the direct footpath across the fields towards our campsite, realisation that our expensive footwear may meet an unfortunate end slowly dawned on us halfway across the field in the dead of night. Now, Denny, being a young man of surprising means and sometimes worrying pocket contents, suddenly announced, which you're about to find out, suddenly announced that he had a solution to the problem of our not being able to see where we were going, or what we were standing in, and produced from his jacket not a torch, as you might expect, but a flare gun.
Yes, felt moccasins and a flare gun.
Yes.
Flares.
Hang on, I've got one of those. Hang on.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's it. Yeah, that's more like,
Like that. He muttered something about not using the red ones. With great deliberation, he proceeded to screw into the end of his device a white cap and then held the contraption at arm's length and into the night sky, pressed the button, released the trigger. Oh, now play.
Here we go. Oh. It's the second one, really, I think, isn't it? Yeah,
There was a huge bang and a very bright white light soared into the night sky, turning the field as bright as day, revealing the footpath and the dreaded cowpats. It had worked. A solution at last. We could see everything. And indeed, we certainly could see everything. You see, Father Simon, our flare had not just revealed the dreaded cowpats across the field, but also a young couple who appeared to be getting on famously in the field not far from the footpath that we were following. Of course, the fact that the night had suddenly turned into day also had the effect of emptying the tavern as the other patrons came out to see why the night had suddenly turned as bright as day. I think it's fair to say they provided the young couple with plenty of encouragement and helpful advice. As the flare or night sun slowly fell back to the earth, burning out after what seemed like minutes, but in reality was probably just about 50 seconds, which is still plenty long enough, Denny and I turned our backs on the pub and continued along the footpath away from the scene of the total embarrassment that we had caused.
Oh.
So, Father Simon, I beg forgiveness for being a part of this disturbing act, partly for having 1980s tasselled felt moccasins when walking boots would have been more appropriate, the same footwear that caused us to take a shortcut back across the field, but mainly I beg forgiveness for having disturbed the last few moments of our fellow drinkers' beers. As they were. Anyway, I like this.
Here we go.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh.
There aren't too many flare confessions.
No.
We like sort of inappropriate footwear confessions, walking across field confessions, that kind of thing.
Well, inappropriate trousers.
Inappropriate trousers, very good. I like
very
what
good.
you've done. What do you say to Luke, sister?
I love the quote, the man of worrying pocket contents.
Yes.
That is just fabulous.
Why would you take a flare on holiday and to the pub?
Well, because you never know when you might need it. And they did need it. I thought you were going to say that they wanted to signal for help because they were stuck in the middle of the field with cowpats all around them.
To be fair, though, we did get into trouble in our office because there was a flare left in our office and it was over near your side of the office.
Was it?
Yeah,
Something
we found one. We found
did
one.
Did health and safety come in?
They did. They said, what is that flare doing in the office?
Right.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Anyway,
a small thing.
I think letting off a flare in order to see the way through the cowpats was a bit drastic. And, I think it was a bit of an overreaction. They could have washed their moccasins and, they could have got the emergency services coming along to save them all.
RAF Chivener may have turned
You can't wash moccasins.
Can you not?
You can wipe them, can't you? You can wipe them.
No, that's
true.
stains.
They're made of suede. Anyway, I think it was an overreaction, and you're not forgiven.
Deadly Dean?
Yeah, no trouble intended. A little bit of fun. They weren't to know that they were there. Didn't know they were there. So why should they? You are forgiven.
And Sister Caroline's 1-1 at the moment.
Certainly not forgiven. What if there had been a wild bull in that there field and it had startled it and run towards them, impaling them? That could have happened.
Impaling them?
And you should never be forgiven for wearing moccasins. No.
Here's tonight's tale. Comes from Fred. Fred, thank you very much indeed. Dear Father Simon and the Content Collective, I really am a little too ashamed to disclose this rather unforgiving confession. I am engulfed by guilt every time I recall this rather horrendous affair. Oh. Over the Christmas period of 2008, I agreed to join some friends who were on holiday in Florida. This was a late booking, and as such I couldn't travel with the rest of the party. I excitedly booked a rather convoluted journey from Heathrow Airport to Orlando via Washington. I wasn't overly flushed with cash at the time, and I decided this was not only the cheapest way of getting there, but also the most convenient for my personal circumstances. The outward journey went without a hitch. I didn't really enjoy the long flights alone, but it was worth it knowing I was to have a well-earned break in the sun with friends. Well, the holiday was brilliant, but as with all holidays, it ended all too soon. Before I knew it, it was time to go home. As before, I boarded my plane at Orlando, and the first leg of the journey went relatively smoothly, albeit I had to endure a flight which was akin to a very long bus trip around India. The second and final leg of the journey commenced. I boarded a rather comfortable jet and looked forward to a nice snooze before landing back in London. The plane taxied out onto the runway, and this is where the problem started. After a few minutes' pause, the captain came on the intercom and said that there was a slight problem with the plane and that we had to return briefly to the terminal in order for the problem to be resolved. This we did, and after about another 30 minutes, the captain said that we had to disembark in order for the plane to be fixed. As you can imagine, I was eager to get home and wasn't overjoyed at this delay. Nevertheless, I got off the plane and followed the rest of the passengers to the terminal. There we waited for over an hour, along with everyone else. I started to get a little agitated, checking the departure screen every 2 minutes. After about another hour or so, a pretty little airline representative, says Fred patronisingly, came into the departure lounge and made an announcement. Well, apparently our plane was broken, and we would have to be transferred onto the next available flight the following day.
What?
However, there were a limited number of seats on an alternative flight. In 3 hours' time, places on this flight will be prioritised according to individual circumstances. Well, I was alone in a foreign country in a hot, sweaty airport with 300 other passengers, some with children, who also wanted to get home. We're instructed to go to a customer service desk where there were 2 airline representatives who would book us onto the appropriate flight. I joined the queue. It seemed endless. People were pushing in, squabbling, getting really agitated and annoyed and shouting a lot. I slowly moved forward, and as I did so, I saw how the airline ladies were getting earache from every passenger and how important it was that they should be awarded seats on the earlier plane. I knew I was destined for a long night trying to sleep on the airport floor. After what seemed like hours, I reached the desk. Without looking up at me, the lady demanded my passport, and this is where I need to seek forgiveness. I handed over my passport and told the nice lady that I really, really needed to get back to the UK. In a broad American accent, she... Oh, hang on.
Oh, come on, you got to do this.
In a broad American accent, she said, "Is that so, sir? Why is that, please?" I then said, and I have no idea where this came from,
Go on.
"I'm donating a kidney tomorrow." She stopped what she was doing, looked up at me and smiled and said, "Sir, you are such a hero."
That's dreadful already.
What, the accent or
both?
She handed me boarding cards for the flight, which was now just about to leave. I was on my way home. That, however, was not the end of my horrendous lie. I boarded the plane along with other passengers who were in genuine need of a speedy return home. I didn't care. I didn't have to sleep on that airport floor. As we taxied out to the runway, the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged to have on board Mr. Garrison. Let's hear it from Mr. Garrison in 32C, who is donating a kidney tomorrow."
Wow.
The plane erupted into applause. I felt proud to be such a kind person, and I had free drinks for the entire flight. That's the whole point of a flight, because they all have free drinks.
What about the kidney?
Father,
Yes, you're supposed to look after the kidney.
Father Simon. That's a very good point. I don't think they spotted that. I see. He was directing it to the other one.
Of course.
"I seek forgiveness not only for this appalling explanation and for all those other passengers left stranded, but from the genuine people who donate organs and body parts willingly," says Fred. Anyway, okay. Well, it's just one of those things. I don't think he knew what he was going to say. She said, "Why are you going? Why do you need to be there?" And he just said, "I'm donating a kidney." It was a lie. He feels bad about it. He got a flight home, but what does Sister Rebecca think?
I think he's just given a load of people a load of ideas about how to get to the front of the queue. He kind of lost me when he said pretty little airline representative.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
To be honest, if I'd noticed that before, I might have actually just...
Well, I mean, no, it's
that
good
bit.
because it shows, you know, the kind of person Fred is, doesn't it? I think Matt would be congratulating him were he here, but he's not here. I think it's pretty low, actually.
Yeah.
And he did manage to ensure that... that's very good, Bradley. He ensured that somebody else who probably really needed to get back didn't. So, no, I think, Fred, you're not forgiven.
Okay, Dean of Deadliness.
Well, I'm looking at my notes here. Fred, you're not forgiven. Dreadful behaviour.
Nicely considered and well argued.
So I have to take Matt's line then.
Sister Caroline, what do you think?
Oh, you're going to forgive?
Well, you know, I have to obviously reason there. He thought about it. He didn't think about it. Got to the front of the queue. I say things sometimes that I regret straight away, often on this programme.
We've noticed.
You can't blurt that sort of thing out.
For that reason alone,
You're joking.
no, he's not forgiven. Of
No.
course he's not.
Let her speak her mind.
I was helping her to reason.
harassment.
I was helping her to reason.
I reckon that's
With a hammer.
This is from Pete. And into the collective, Sister Caroline, for the last time, actually. Because we're going to do one tomorrow.
Not ever.
No, it's Nigel. Sister Rebecca. Pete says, Dear Father Simon and the Holy Order, having only last year moved to Devon and taken up fishing from my local beach, I'm reminded of an incident which is now weighing heavy on my mind, and I seek forgiveness from the drive-time posse of penance. I say there's a little clue there where he talks about the posse of penance. This guy, Pete, likes his alliteration. There is more smart alliteration in this confession than we've ever had, which we'll get to later. My confession recounts the events of a hot summer's day during the school holidays of 1981. Having finished primary school that spring, I was looking forward to spending the summer break playing with my chums, whilst being a bit nervous about the new term at the big school up the road. Often these long breaks from school were filled with football, but for my friend Lenny and myself, we only had one thing on our minds, and that was fishing. Like most boys, the angling bug comes along, and unlike during term time, we would be up at the crack of dawn looking forward to a day's disappointment on the River Thames. Living as we did in a boring suburb of West London, we had to look further afield for I just realised that he did actually name the boring suburb of West London, but we've just renamed it the boring suburb of West London. We had to look further afield for our fishing spots, and as luck would have it, the bus from our street went to Hampton Court Palace, a beautiful spot with the Thames flowing alongside. One morning we arrived at the riverbank at 7:30 in the morning, animatedly discussing the carp, perch, and perhaps even the elusive pike that we would be landing that day. I haven't just included this because we got fish with salad coming up later. But
You say my jokes are bad.
yeah.
The elusive pike.
These mornings always followed a similar pattern. The bigger boys would arrive after us and laugh at our rubbish attempts at casting. By 9 o'clock we'd have eaten our soggy sandwiches, which were meant to last us all day, and come midday we were thoroughly bored with having caught nothing, whilst those around us had been reeling in fish all morning. The river was also getting busier with pleasure craft, and those inept tourists who thought it would be a good idea to hire a rowing boat. Rather than impress their girlfriends, they were crashing our lines. It was time, Father Simon, to call it a day. The sun was beating down and we had no food left, so we packed up our rods and put our tackle into a big bag and headed toward the bridge to wait for the next bus home. Whilst walking, I remembered that I still had half a pot of bait, live maggots that Lenny's dad had bred. I had no intention of bringing these wrigglers into my house, as my mum would go spare if I set foot inside with them. So I put the pot on the side of the bridge. Whilst we're in the process of discussing what to do with them, maybe I should bury them, or give them to a fellow angler, the decision was taken out of my hands quite literally. The pot had got quite slippery, a combination of river water and maggot juice, whatever that is, and I'm afraid to report that as I reached for the maggots, the pot squirmed out of my hand. I somehow managed to grab the pot as it fell, but not before it had inverted, and the writhing mass of maggoty ghastliness fell. While all this was happening, a rowing boat was heading towards us on the water. This wasn't one of the boats occupied by a love-struck couple, but was one of those long, pointy ones, which you see Oxford and Cambridge boys racing on the telly every April, and it was being powered by about 8 muscly lads in their late teens. Lenny and I peered over as the contents of the bait box rained down onto the finely honed hoorays. "What have you done?" Lenny shouted. "Quick, let's have a look on the other side." Looking down onto the water, we saw the boat of fancy fops, but they were rowing no more. Oars were up, and those tousled toffs were... This guy, Pete, is almost certainly a headline writer for the Daily Mirror, or Socialist Worker, one of the two. Oars were up, and those tousled toffs were picking maggots out of their hair and scratching all over. They looked up at us, and confused faces suddenly turned angry. Fingers were pointing, and fists were shaking. Lenny and I were now in fits of giggles as the boat pulled up on the riverbank. Some of these rowers were now standing up and preparing to disembark. "Right-o, time to go," we thought. "Run, Lenny!" I shouted. Running along the bridge, it appeared that a lucky escape could be imminent. Our bus was hurtling towards us, and it looked like we might make it on board. After showing the driver my bus pass, I collapsed onto a seat, still laughing and gasping for breath. The bus pulled away. But where was Lenny?
Uh-oh.
Well, he'd missed the bus, and I was heading home without my friend. I was immediately filled with dread at the thought of what those yelling yuppies were doing to him. Oh, well, there'll be another bus along in 2 hours. He can get that one, I thought. So, Father Simon, I need forgiveness not from the seething swells. After all, I can forever hold my head high, knowing that I unwittingly bested the Bullingdon bunch with a pint of maggots, but from Lenny. You see, not only did I leave him to the retribution of the livid la-di-dars, when it was I who was responsible for their ire, but upon returning home I was going through the tackle bag when I discovered Lenny's bus pass.
Oh.
It transpired that he had escaped their wrath by running off and hiding in a hedge. But after a 2-hour wait for the next bus, he also had to plead through his tears to the bus driver, who eventually let him off his fare. Well, very good. I like the alliteration, Peter. Thank you very much indeed. Very good. And maggots raining down from a bridge when you're a hooray Henry, making your way quietly past Hampton Court Palace. There was a lot of angry fist waving going on. What do you think, Sister Rebecca?
Well, I'm not sure whether this was an accident or not, because he sounded quite pleased that he dropped the maggots on the tousled toffs.
Well, he said he was reaching for them and then just sort of...
Yeah, but if it was an accident, obviously, it's not his fault. But if it wasn't, then it was his fault. But I think it was an accident. He was just rather pleased about it. It also wasn't his fault that Lenny didn't catch the bus, and he didn't mean to take Lenny's bus pass. So I think for all those reasons, I'm going to forgive you, Pete.
OK, so, Sister Caroline...
Well, I too tend to agree with you. I was worried at a moment we wouldn't hear what happened to Lenny, but it appears he was all fine in the end. And we've all left something in someone else's handbag, haven't we?
What's going to be for?
Yes, nothing. And so I think for that reason, as Rebecca pointed out, none of it was his fault.
What are you talking about? Leaving things? What are you talking about?
I always leave things in other people's bags.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you?
Credit cards, car keys, yeah.
What do you say, Novice Nige?
Yes. They avoid tussling with the tousle toffs, so pitch-perfect Peter, I think, did really well. And it was just unfortunate that loitering Lenny got done. So it wasn't his fault. He didn't mean any of it. He didn't mean to drop the mighty maggots onto them, onto the yelling yuppies. So that'll do. Get the gun. But no, and he did all right, poor lad. So I definitely forgive you, Pete.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our Edinburgh highlights. Remember, you can watch and hear more on the website bbc.co.uk/Radio 2. Don't forget to download our special Edinburgh Confessions podcast from the same place you got this.